here is the piece created with 3 holes. Now we need to think about how to easily adapt this piece into versions with 4, 5, or 6 holes. For the design of your future part, you'll need to use many pieces. We don't want to start from scratch each time we design the part. The goal is to easily adapt this piece into different sizes using Fusion's configuration tool. To do this, you'll find the tool here. It's the configuration tool. I'll click on it, and now I enter a configuration window. You see the blue square here with the small configuration tool icon. If I click on the check mark, I exit this configuration tool. Here I have my first configuration, and I'll rename it right away. It's currently a figure with 3 holes. Great. When I'm in this configuration menu, another thing to notice is that all the path creation features have turned blue. The key will be to retrieve in these features the dimensions that allow us to create the new part with 4, 5, or 6 holes, so we can identify them and adjust them to the current length. Here, the first element that will interest us is the length dimension to extend the part and add more holes. We enter this length dimension in the initial sketch by clicking on this sketch. I now have a menu that allows me to select the dimensions I'm interested in. When I hover over D6, I see the dimension of 16 millimeters appear in the part. That's what I'm interested in. I check it and click OK. Now I can see that my 16 millimeters dimension has appeared in my configuration table. That's great. Once I adjust this length, I'll need to add more holes. In our design, the multiplication of the number of holes was done using this tool here, which I'll also select. For this, I modify the number of holes. Along the first axis, I can adjust either the distance or the quantity, but it's the quantity that I'm interested in. I'll check this box. Indeed, here I have the correct number of holes. Finally, I also have the recess that allows the part to be injected. Same thing, I need to duplicate this recess, and that's why I'll go to the last duplication. I'll check the quantity as well. I now have my 3 reference dimensions that will allow me to modify my part as needed. Here's my first configuration. I'll create a second configuration right away by clicking on plus, renaming it, and I'll go with, for example, 4 holes. To move to 4 holes, I need to increase the distance. From my design, I know there are 8 millimeters between each hole. So here I have 2 times 8, which gives me 16. 3 times 8 is 24, so I'll set it to 24 millimeters to extend my part. I can see it adjust right away. Next, I need to duplicate my holes. To do this, I'll duplicate it here and set it to 4 holes since that's what I want. And I'll duplicate the number of empty spaces between the holes. I'll set it to 3. I confirm and I exit the configuration tool. My feeders are no longer blue, and I can see that my part is now set for a 4-hole configuration. I can easily switch between configurations using this menu at the top here. If I click, I can select 3 holes or 4 holes. That's a bit about how the configuration works. Now, the downside of this is that if I want to create a part with 8 holes, for example, I have to calculate 7 times 8 each time. This doesn't take much time, but we could potentially simplify this table so that we don't have to modify 3 dimensions every time we want to change a part shape. Just fewer dimensions. And that's a really interesting feature in Fusion that we'll see now. I'll go to Modify, and at the bottom of the Modify menu, I have Change Parameters. By clicking on it, a table will open. In this table, if I expand the Piece menu, I have my entire manufacturing history, which I can obviously see here. What's interesting is that if I expand the element, I have all the dimensions used in the sketch here. You can see with the small check mark here in the configuration, we have the dimension name, its expression, how it's written, and the absolute value of the sketch. That's a bit about these elements. What else can we see here? If I open the pattern, one and the other, I also have the elements I'm interested in, particularly the number of holes and the number of empty spaces between the holes. What I propose is to take the number of holes as a reference. When we want a piece with 8 holes, we can input it directly, so this will be the dimension I'm interested in. I'll click on the star icon to add it to my favorites. So by clicking on the star, it appears in my favorites. Next, I'll rename it. I'll call it number so that it has a name I can easily refer to. Number, great. Now this dimension is named number with a value of 4. For the length of the part, remember, we said if we have a part with 4 holes, we have a length of 24. 3 times 8 is 24. What I can do here is change this element. I'll click on it, add parentheses, and type number. So I'll write number. And if you look here, I immediately get a suggested name that corresponds to my dimension. So by clicking on it, what do I see? I see that number now refers to this dimension. This means that the number 4 is referenced. Now I'll do 3 times 8, which is the number 4 in the number dimension, minus 1 to get 3 times 8. That's my new expression. If I hit enter, what do I see? I see that the value remains 24 because I have number, which represents 4 minus 1 times 8. It adds times 1 millimeter because it's a value in millimeters. So that's why it needs to add this dimension. So we've just linked the D6 dimension to the number of holes. We'll do the same thing for the number of empty spaces between the holes. Similarly, here I'll say to make it 3, I'll write number, which represents 4 minus 1. The value remains 3. So now I've linked my 2 dimensions. I'll click OK, and I'll return to the configuration tool. And here I can see that the elements have changed in my dimensions. Okay, what I'll do now is remove these 2 dimensions since they're now linked to the number of holes. So I'll delete them. Now I'll add a configuration. I'll name it 8 holes. By doing this, I'll modify my number dimension. I'll set it to 8. What do I see? Boom. I see that my part has indeed switched to 8 holes because I've linked the dimensions. So now the table is much simpler to fill out if we want to add many different part shapes of various sizes. And I clearly have the configuration here. I can easily switch between them. That's it for the configuration tool.